quitter la vie. Appréciez ça, yo café quand yo a parmi nous aujourd'hui.
Spécial, bonjour tout le monde, à toute la Dominique. Aux Antilles, c'est un grand plaisir pour nous là, messieurs. Nous réalisons bienvenue. Pulsation Créole, c'est là nous avons partagé beaucoup d'informations. Nous avons toute qualité grand invité. Vraiment, bonjour. Un grand week-end à Dominique, c'est fête maman Dominique. Nous avons souhaité toute maman, spécial, bon week-end. Bon fête maman à Dominique et Caraïbes là, messieurs. Aujourd'hui, là, nous avons un grand invité, Rod Lucie. C'est important pour nous continuer, partager informations. Pour ça qui est passé à Creole langue là, et aussi à culture là, et toutes différentes nouvelles qui sont passées parce que nous n'avons rien qui est très important. Dominique, cette Lucie, Haïti, Guadeloupe, Martinique. Nous c'est la même, messieurs, mesdames, c'est Afrique qui est assis à nous. Pleasant morning, Dominique. Good morning, it's the Caribbean. Welcome to another Creole Heartbeat program. I am Ambassador Prince Wadix, and I'll be with you until 12 o'clock. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Only one as you done for us, spreading the culture all over the world. For all the good things that you done for God, that's why.
And with us this morning from the Helen of the West, St. Lucia, Sister Helen St. Lucia.
We thanking you, brother.
Mr. Earl Bousquet.
Hello.
And is the chair of the St. Lucia National Reparations Committee, member of CARICOM Reparations Committee, also a senior political correspondent and talk show host. 49 years as a chronic Caribbean chronicler, exploring the intersection of St. Lucia. So let's see if we can say good morning to my brother, my friend, my comrade. Bonjour, Earl, Sagafet.
Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde.
Est-ce que tout bite bien? Makatanou, Massav, ça qui a passé là, Makatanou, est-ce que tout bite bien? Au Katan, moi? Okay, we are not hearing Earl. Ah, Massav, ça qui a passé là, nous pas Katan, Earl. Est-ce que nous là? Ok, pas de problème, messieurs, mesdames. Donc, il partager information là pour vous tout à l'heure. Okay, we see. Well, check your mic to make sure that everything is okay today. Not sure if you're hearing me loud and clear.
Everything seems to be okay.
So once again, it's our pleasure to be with you. It's a wonderful Friday. Earl, let us see if we have Earl. Good morning. Est-ce que vous attendez, mon frère?
Oui, je m'attends bien,
Mon way ka parler, ka sam Miko, est-ce que Miko tout bite bien vers ou à nous voir ça ou tout bite à notre là. Donc à garder tout bite à notre messieurs mesdames, nous disons spécial tout le monde à toute la Dominique et aux Antilles, c'est un grand plaisir pour nous là avec vous messieurs mesdames. Nous disons bienvenue pour Session Créole, messieurs, ça c'est là nous partager information comme ça qui va passer à Créole à toute qualité forme messieurs. C'est fête maman. C'est un grand week-end pour nous. À nous voir si nous n'y all d'accord. Bonjour, frère.
Bonjour.
Of course, man. Ça fait nous plaisir là. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well. C'est toujours un plaisir pour moi ça là qu'à partager avec vous. Ou dit ou pas qu'à vraiment ou pas qu'à tellement ça c'est pisse moi là qu'à garder ça qui a fait à souper au lion la terre pour nous ça causer aujourd'hui. I'm staying in touch with the world for us.
Premièrement, St. Lucie. Comment St. Lucie? How is St. Lucia, the Helen of the West?
Oh, everything. C'est ici à bagay kabouye. We have been pursuing a reputation as the entertainment capital of the OECS, and it would seem that every year we try to put that in place. We just had 10,000 persons attending the opening of jazz on the last day of April into the May Day holiday. 10,000 paying persons. They stopped selling tickets after 10,000 persons were in the Mindu Philip Park at Marchand. We also are starting this evening St. Lucia Jazz and Arts Festival final weekend with all of the big stars from Earth, Wind and Fire and John Legend all the way to other Caribbean artists, included Sizzler and others who are here. And it's a very, very bagay kabouye, mais week-end ça là, ce dernier week-end avec tout le monde qui sort dehors, ticket tout con, 100, $200 américains, mais pas un ticket encore, ticket qui vend un chay cette lycéen, qui venu sortir l'autre pays, un chay américain avec Jean Caraïbe qui vivent l'Amérique, qui venu pour Holiday, un chay cette lycéen qui a servi ça pour venir pour jazz et ouest pour carnaval, because after jazz ends this weekend, the carnival, the lineup starts immediately, and carnival joined with calypso, and that runs between June and July. And at the end of July, we go into Emancipation Month, un mois activité émancipation qui a commencé 1er août, qui a fini 31 août. And after Emancipation Month, we start preparing for with Dominica for Creole Heritage Month in October, when all Creole-speaking people, pas seulement cette lycée avec Dominique, mais en Guadeloupe avec Saint-Martin, avec tout Oliwon la terre, nous avons gardé pour faire une activité côté, nous avons fait link avec Dominique, avec Saint-Lycée avec Dominique, nous avons fait contact avec ces différents pays qui parlent créole. Avec vous savez, Journée Créole Internationale, c'est toujours dernier dimanche qui plie pour le 25 Octobre. So we in St. Lucia have identified that weekend to have a Creole Heritage Weekend activity that would see the platforms in St. Lucia and Dominica unite with the UWI-TV, the other various regional platforms, to join with those of the African Union to ensure we can work with the Creole speaking nations in Africa so that we could develop a bridge between the Caribbean and Africa, which is not only for African Liberation Day or Creole Heritage Day, mais pour ça là, nous avons servi pour nous ça faire constant contact entre Caraïbes avec Afrique, nous avons reversé Middle Passage là, avec passage ça là, plutôt mené Africain ici, comme esclave, nous avons monté pour aider Afrique déchaîner quoi, sortir en bas colonialisme, comme nous, j'ai commencé à faire aussi avec réparation. Avec, nous allons parler about ça a little later. I'm sure we'll go into reparations. But I'm glad to be here today.
In Dominica, we are also preparing for a very special moment where the West African country of Benin will be visiting Dominica as part of a 3-nation tour exhibition basketball matches. And that will start from the 22nd. It will commence in Martinique on the 22nd, the 24th Dominica, and Guadeloupe on the 27th. So we are preparing for the West African country. We know that our ancestors came from that part of Africa. So it's a historic moment for us in Dominica, and we are preparing. Our national team will actually play against the national team of Benin on the 24th in Dominica.
Okay.
So that starts on the 22nd in Martinique. Then all the teams come to Dominica on the 24th, the 24th, and then we climax in Guadeloupe for the 27th. So let's hope that everything can work out. So next year, 2026, St. Lucia will be part of this experience.
Moi, j'ai fait un note à ça.
Oui, pas de problème. Et puis,
l'année, l'autre bagaille, nous avons travaillé ensemble. For example, we have the ma changer non mais pied bois côté yo ka fait canot.
Oui, canot.
Ouais, bois canou.
Bois canou, ouais.
Oui, bon nous ni bois canou, yo te ka servi en chay en temps là nous te ka servi bois ça là pour faire canot. Mais depuis on mène fiberglass.
C'est gommier ça qu'a fait après
ça. Gommier. Non, pardon. C'est gommier nous en pied gommier nous pas di bois canou. Gomme nous te ka servi gommier pour faire canot.
Ouais,
il était venu presque extinct parce que
ouais,
tout le monde était qu'à pêcher, là, tenait plus pêcher.
ouais,
Nous pas tenir plus, nous capoter, viande sortie tout partout.
ouais, ouais.
So it was near extinct and it was very expensive. But then in the 70s and 80s came the fiberglass, and everybody moved from gummy to fiberglass. But not only were they going away from a useful local tradition, but they were risking themselves for profit and ease, because the gommier tree, when you make the boat with the gommier, when it turn over, it floats.
Yeah.
The fiberglass goes down.
Yes, yes, yes. But the
Okay.
Bormir from historic perspectives was used, I guess, by the Caribs, the
Yes,
Kalinagos.
yes, yes, yes. So I do know that in Guadeloupe and Martinique, they have a gommier race
Yes,
that they do regularly, and they shape it like the Hawaiian boats with
yeah,
the side. And
yes.
we could include, I know that they're looking to include Dominica and St. Lucia in the next set of races, because all of this is part of reclaiming our Creole heritage. Puis c'est by ça pas jamais, yo pas jamais coulé.
Well,
So même si yo te ka coin yo te ka shoot, yo te ka chebe avec yo te ka vie ou mais yo te ka jete gloire ek vie a boy encore pour yo sa vie a te pour vivre encore.
et
So the point was
même si c'est bateau là, Chalviwe, ou
yeah,
même
so
ça, à sous bateau là même, à sous,
oui,
ouais, ou ça
so
sauver la vie ou à sous bateau là même si
sous
bateau
bateau
là
à même,
Chalviwe.
oui, mais pas sous fiberglass là.
Non,
Alors
ça
à
qui,
présent, côté nous ni gommier vie, nous ni un chay gommier à présent, mais yo pas qu'à faire qu'un autre avec ça encore. Avec ces gomme qui te ka fait qu'un autre, j'ai commencé mort.
ouais.
Parce que c'est une tradition qui est mort avec ces gomme. So my idea and what we are working on here is looking at getting the elderly persons with that skill in Martinique and Guadeloupe to come to Dominica and St. Lucia and to teach young people the skill of cutting the gummy tree, digging it out, and making the boat, and of course, making them for the purpose of racing, but also with an educational aspect. Côté nous ka fait moun sab, c'est pas anik nous ka fait ça pis nous men pied bois, mais c'est pis pied bois ça la pas ka couler.
This is very interesting, and like we said, this is all part of the whole Creole heritage.
Yes,
But I
yes,
want
yes.
to just quite a bit of people spoke to me after our program last week, and
Hmm.
based on the Creole is the national language of Saint Lucia,
Yes.
and English is the official
Official. Yes.
language.
Hmm.
Now, what steps that were taken to get the legislation in place for the language, the Creole language, to be the national language of St. Lucia? And what are some of the main areas that encompasses that whole national approach to the language of Creole?
The efforts towards taking Creole back to school, as we describe it, started in 1979 when there was that major change. Because of political infighting, that government died in 1982 and was changed in 1983. In 1997, another effort was made all the way up until 2021. That effort was stymied by the fact of regime change. Every 5 years in the last five elections, we have changed government. And every government out of the two parties we have, like in Dominica, UWP and SLP, and Labour Party and UWP, every time one changes, the main programs of the other suffer. And therefore, the UWP in St. Lucia did not have and does not have, by their own admission, the will to go back, like they say, go back to Creole. They're looking more in terms of going forward to IT and AI, etc., etc. But it is not an easy possibility, even for labor parties that might have the will to do it, because to take Creole to school, you have to first be able to put it in the curriculum. The Ministry of Education has to put it in the curriculum. And any teacher around you will tell you how difficult it is to get the traditional minds who are in charge of curriculum development to bend in favor of introducing a new language that would require a new alphabet, that would require a new language writing system, that would require by itself a separate level of education that is unprecedented. Most of the older heads taking decisions, who are, in our case, a lot of them can be close to retirement, will find that that's too much work and would simply point it as something that will take a longer time, and therefore we have to have a 5-year program. The Prime Minister on the 1st of August, the current Prime Minister, on the 1st of August 2021, indicated in his very first address to the nation, even before he was sworn in as Prime Minister, he indicated that a priority in his first term will be to take Creole back to school, and not just back to school, but at the level of primary, secondary, and tertiary, and to link it with an educational program that is already existing at universities in France, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Cayenne, Saint Martin, where they are actually teaching the Creole we speak as a university language. And for about 20 years, there is a degree in Creole that has existed, which is now recognized by the University of the West Indies, but again, in the English speaking countries in CARICOM, which are the vast majority, they are getting even more resistance from the what we call the education, the traditional education society, which are saying, listen, like in Barbados, they tell you, well, why would we want to recognize Creole? We don't speak Creole in Barbados. The Jamaicans will say, if we're going to adopt Creole, we might as well adopt Jamaican patois. And it is all these hurdles that you come up against. Number one, unwillingness on the part of the traditional people who are in charge of education. Puis nous sommes dans une situation à présent, Radix, côté qu'on a parlé ici, 21st century, en University of the West Indies, ils ont tenu pour prendre une décision pour faire history, l'histoire. Un bagay qui mandatory. Puis jeune moun pa vle apprendre history. Puis yo de sa pan la jardin. Yo pas ça faire pièce l'argent ça. So yo pas ka apprendre history. So nous ni 2 et 3 générations qui levé à l'université mais à dans qualité concept éducation qui l'Angleterre qui te ban nous côté nous c'est sujet l'Angleterre sujet qui parle anglais qui a préparé pour aller à sous la terre anglais hot Dominique hot Saint-Lucie hot Caraïbes. So nous ça joindre training dans l'école à dans sujet qui nous passe à joindre travail pour la caille nous côté nous obligé à aller l'autre pays et fait là nous aller l'autre pays normalement c'est yon en tout 10 qui ka gade pour lui puis travail là yo ka joindre yo passe à joindre cette ici Dominique avec un Caraïbes là et là arrivé là yo fait marié avec fait famille yo et yo settle yo jeune green card yo et ben passeport yo en l'autre pays yo c'est un citoyen l'autre pays qui yo considéré plus meilleur, qui yo considéré ni plus gain ba yo. Alors nous ni pour réformer avec Sir Hilary Beckles avec les autres moun en University West Indies. They had to rescue the English language as a subject at as a UE subject by making it compulsory because there were people on the CXC board, the Caribbean Examinations Council board, and among the directors at the University of the West Indies who were opposed to making history a mandatory subject. They say if the children don't like it, well, why force them to choose it? But it was sometimes our leaders take decisions on our behalf. Not all are good, but when they are good, we have to accept. And in the same way that Sir Hilary Beckles and others were able to ensure that history remains an available subject, a voluntary subject at UWI, it is in the same way we have to appreciate the fact that 10 years ago, 11 years ago, going on to 12 this year will be 12 years since the heads of government of CARICOM established the CARICOM Reparations Commission, the CARICOM Reparations Council, that is the CRC. And 12 years later, what we have is 14 independent Caribbean governments representing former British, French, and Dutch colonies who are knocking on the doors of the United Kingdom, first of all, and demanding reparations for slavery and native genocide. But in the case of St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Martin, Guyana, Trinidad, Grenada, and others that were also occupied by France, enough research hasn't been made to make a similar claim for reparations against France. Research was not done to make a similar claim against the Netherlands or even the United States for the US Virgin Islands, or in this case, Greenland, because what we are finding out now is that since President Trump said he wants Greenland, the deal that exists between the US and Greenland was one that allowed the Norwegians to take Greenland in exchange with the US for the Virgin Islands. So if Trump takes Greenland, the status of the Virgin Islands will automatically come into question. So these are the links that we have to make. Nothing is separate in the world today. So that our reparations has been there from the first day the first slave, free African, was kidnapped and put on a ship to be sold into slavery. From the time they landed, they wanted to go back. That's thought of repatriation. And now we are talking about repatriation with reparations. But they are not going to push their hands in their pockets and just give up the reparations. We have had to mount that struggle. Mais gardez côté nous hier à présent, après 11 ans, même reparations là, programme nous ni 10-point plan of action for reparatory justice. Même 10 points qui CARICOM adopté 2013. C'est même 10 points là qui adopté par l'Amérique. C'est Black Congressional Caucus avec les autres moun qui a poussé reparations l'Amérique après Floyd, après il a tué Book Floyd là. OK? Bon, ça j'ai arrivé côté là, ni différents states, different federal states in America have passed legislation to give reparations. Say, listen, we owe Black Americans or African Americans, whatever you want to call yourself, but you have to do DNA tests to prove that somebody among you was from Africa. There are other states, however, that are saying we have to give reparations to everybody who is black, okay, who is a black American. Because there are black Americans who tell you don't call them African Americans. There's black Americans. So you have different approaches in different states as to who should qualify for reparations. But in the Caribbean,
I was just coming to the Caribbean now.
yes, yes. So in the
Update us.
Caribbean,
Mhm.
how we have not identified any race or any qualification. We say reparations has to come to the country, to the Caribbean, and we have estimated that over 100 billion US dollars is due only to the Caribbean. We're not even including the United States. And that money has been identified by a special commission headed by a Jamaican ex judge with the International Court of Justice called Judge Robinson. And they presented something called the Brattle Report, Brattle. People could go and look it up online. And that Brattle Report shows how much Dominica, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Grenada, Trinidad, how much every island is due for reparations. But what we don't know is what formula they used to arrive at that figure because they did not consult national committees to be part of that. But Haitian Didon Blanc, even though we do not like how they went about it, we are glad that they have given us figures that we could work by. So anybody in St. Lucia could go online, check the Brattle Report, or in Dominica, and you could know how much your country is due according to this internationally accepted commission. That having been said, we haven't got to the stage yet of where the money is going. What we have is what we will do with the money. And that 10-point plan, you could also Google the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparations. And that 10-point plan goes from 1 to 10, saying what we're going to do with the money and why we want it. So it starts off by saying we will require a formal apology, and it will also allow for repatriation to Africa by anybody who wants to go back. And the other 8 indicate the things that we would be doing. For example, Chuck does had a song called Grandfather Back Pay. Give me my grandfather back pay, which suggests that we're supposed to get back pay for our grandfather's labor. Now, that is a sort of a reparations anthem as far as I'm concerned, but the concept of distribution of the reparations money is not one where every Dominican and St. Lucian will be able to take their idea and go to the treasury on the last Friday of every month and say, we come and collect our grandfather back pay. It doesn't work that way. What we would do is ensure that that money is funneled into everybody, the entire country benefiting. So we would establish museums. We would establish educational, scientific institutions to share the science and technology that was built on the back of the Industrial Revolution, that was built on the back of slavery. We will be able to engage in medical transfer. In fact, the University of one of the big universities that was had a big role in slavery recently put aside 100 million euros to provide to the University of the West Indies to engage in a joint program to come up with medicines for the ailments that came with slavery, like diabetes, type 2, and the various medical diseases that have been identified as residing in the bodies of people who are descendants of the slave period, to be able to go into the research, because in the industrial countries they don't see any need to make that kind of research. So it is all of that we point out in the 10-point plan, how the money will be spent. But we don't have it yet. So the issue is, where will it go? And how will we make sure it doesn't go in politicians' pockets? How will we make sure it doesn't go into ministries of finance, so different ministers can change the rules and decide that they're going to use reparations money for private purposes? What the idea is that the 14 CARICOM states would come together and establish. That was the recommendation of Sir Arthur Lewis. That's another book we need to go and read up. It's called Labor in the West Indies. It's the first book written by Sir Arthur Lewis in 1939. It is on Google as well and on Amazon. But that has been seen as the blueprint for reparations. And one of the things Sir Arthur Lewis was saying in that, to save the money and to ensure it goes into the right places, you have to establish a non-governmental regional institutional, not a bank, not but a regional financial institution that is recognized by the governments, but the governments do not have control over its decisions. And the governments cannot reverse its decisions. And the members of that board would have to have enough of a long period of service. You know, like the Supreme Court of the USA, once you get appointed, you stay there for life. If you become the Pope, you stay there for life. So that you give the people who are guarding that money enough time to implement the distribution over a decade at least, so that you don't have a situation where the reality is, in every 1 year there's about 5 elections in CARICOM. So you don't want to have a board that changing, having 5 changes every year. So the entity has to be one qui est toujours là, qui kay toujou ni, même se moun avec même se l'idée qui te d'accord pour faire même bagay la, qui la pli tombe, qui soleil éclairé. Avec bagay la qui plus important, c'est pour yo sa servi l'argent ça là pour reparations, pour ce bagay la nous déclarer qui nous kay fait sans nous changer bagay avec mener bagay neuf.
But Earl, how optimistic are you that we, if not our generation, but the future generation will get that reparations money?
I am very optimistic. Let us put it this way. It is 571 years, or 573 years, or 72 years, over 570 years since Columbus set his eyes on Haiti in 1492. And it is 2034 will be 200 years since emancipation. Reparations was being pursued from emancipation. In 1884, 50 years after emancipation, the Queen of England had to have a special consultation on reparations because the people of African descent, the sons and daughters of the supposedly emancipated, now free slaves, were still realizing the same sufferance that they suffered as slaves. They had no land, no home, they were worse off. And 50 years later, at that conference, not the African National Congress, the Pan-African Congress took shape, and they appointed a Caribbean man to represent the people of African descent who, for the first time in 1888, were demanding that they be returned to Africa. That St. Lucian, his name was John Quinlan. He subsequently became a secretary of the Pan African Congress, and he returned in 1900 to England with the first Pan African Congress to again highlight that Caribbean people were among the first to demand repatriation and reparations. Now, that was in 1900. 100 years later, 113 years later, we had the first call for reparations by CARICOM governments. And for the first time in the world history, 12 governments had come together and knock on the door of the European Union and say, hello, we want to discuss reparations, and we want to discuss reparations, and we want to discuss the repatriation and reparations. Now, I go all of that history to show you that in just 12 years, we have moved from not having anything on the table about reparations to being in a situation where we have 14 governments recognized by the United Nations have been put in for reparations. Reparations is now on the agenda at the United Nations, where all CARICOM heads of government have to address reparations every September at United Nations General Assembly. The CARICOM ambassadors in the United Nations pushed 10 years ago for the establishment of a decade for people of African descent. And that decade was established, and it went like nothing. Now we have a second decade that has been agreed to by the United Nations, and Dr. June Suma from St. Lucia was the first chairperson of the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And there again, on behalf of CARICOM, she was able to ensure that Dominica, St. Lucia, and the other so-called smaller countries, what used to be called lesser developed countries, now the OECS, she was able to make sure we have that level of representation. Today, the United States Congress, Congressional Black Caucus, is consulting CARICOM on how to pursue reparations in the United States. And sometime next month, the repair campaign, which is led by the former chairman of Digicel, Dennis O'Brien, is taking the representatives of the CARICOM reparations movement to Brussels and London to discuss with the political leaders and the administrative leaders of Europe, the European Union, and the British government, where we're going with the proposals that they have put to the governments, and which the governments have basically agreed to, for a 25-year plan on what we are going to do with our reparations money and how we are going to handle it. Now, that plan, again, if we had to wait for it to go around Dominica and all of the 15 countries before it gets agreed, we would still be discussing it. So that is another decision. When you vote for people, you have to trust that they will take decisions in your interest. And here again, having gone with the repair plan, the repair team is saying, okay, we are not just dealing with the governments, we are taking the national committees to go and directly confront the British government, the European governments, the European Union, and to meet with themselves and promoters of reparations in the UK, so that we can work together to put the pressure on Buckingham Palace and Whitehall. The last thing I want to say in that regard is that we have been so effective in the 10 years that just before the Queen died, Queen Elizabeth, in her last month on earth, she had her grandson, Prince William, and her son, Prince Philip, to both go to the Caribbean. Prince William in Jamaica and Prince Charles in Barbados at its when it became a republic. And she had both of them to say that Britain is sorry for slavery. Britain is sorry, and what I call it is a royal statement, a royal expression of sorrow. But what we in the movement we are divided over is whether we should be demanding an apology or whether we should accept the expression of sorrow as amounting to just short of an apology. Because there's a legal implication here. Si c'est si l'Angleterre, Queen nan ebe l'Angleterre apologe, ça veut dire yo accepté ki esclavage c'est un crime. Et si yo accepté légalement que c'était un crime, naturellement, yo ka ni pour d'accord pour payer compensation. So, yo pas ka di yo ka apologe, yo tout après Jean ka di, we are sorry. The King of the Netherlands came out and expressed an apology. But it turned out they said that that apology was for the rule of his family and not the Netherlands state. Prince Philip, when he became king, he appointed a commission to investigate the role of the royal family in slavery and to share that information with the world. That has never been done by a king. And no queen has authorized an expression of a statement of royal sorrow for reparations. So in my book, these are positive things to take and run with. But there are others among us who feel that's not enough. And I do not see Britain apologizing tomorrow because look today, the foreign minister of Britain is a man of African descent. The leader of the opposition in Britain is a woman of African descent. And yet the two major parties, the British Labour Party and the Conservative Party, they are both together in saying they don't owe us reparations. They have given us enough aid. And that position today, just a few years before the bicentenary of Britain's Emancipation Act, you have two black people, two people of African descent, having to explain to Africa, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world why white Britain, which established its empire on the backs, the blood, the sweat, and the tears of African slaves, they are saying to two black persons, the foreign minister and the leader of the opposition, go and tell the world why we don't owe people who look like you nothing, whether in Africa, the Caribbean, or the rest of the world. Now, when the commissioners go to England, nous ka joindre avec ces moun sa là aussi. Avec nous ka sa mande yo, qui côté yo est what manger conscience yo. Avec yo ka di nou, yo ni conscience yo, mais yo ni travail yo pour faire. Avec moi ha parlé pour dire yo qui travail yo c'est pour vendre nous, et travail nous c'est pour empêcher yo vendre nous. So nous pour décider ce nous ka babie et ben nous ka gomme. Mais en bagay ni pour faire. And I think I say all of that to say that it is quite possible that given the number of things that have happened in the past 12 years, The speed with which reparations, which started, the bell rang in the Caribbean, it is now a global thing. Africa is on board. The African Union is on board. India is on board because they want reparations for indentured slaves, indentureship for the Indians who were brought to the Caribbean to replace the slaves to keep the wheels of fortune turning. So, to answer your question in that long haul, is to say that I am optimistic that it is also possible. I didn't say likely, but possible, given the speed with which things change in the world today, that we might see reparations start being paid out during our lifetime. And if
Yes,
not in our
Dominica.
lifetime, not in our lifetime, certainly in the lifetime of our children and grandchildren who don't have the time to waste that we had when we did not have access to information online. Just buy your information ek diyo ay mo de Monsieur Google ek nou kay duha.
This is a special Creole Heartbeat program, and with us is Earl Bousquet, the chair of the St. Lucia National Reparations Committee, also a member of the CARICOM Reparations Committee. He's a senior political correspondent, talk show host, and voice columnist. Also, 49-year journey, 49-year career as a chronic Caribbean chronicler, exploring the intersection of St. Lucia. Also, one of the things that concerns me as a Pan Africanist is the level of education. Are we or are the various reparations committee communicating with the public enough? I'm not sure how is it done in St. Lucia. Are we doing what we should be doing to educate the entire African base in the Caribbean? You could possibly speak to St. Lucia as we speak. What are you doing in St. Lucia to get that level of awareness as to what transpired? Where are we? And how important it is for us to actually achieve this reparation and even repatriation for what we went through as a people.
Now I have a way of when I talk, people say I'm making things sound nice. And you're an ambassador, but you know the traditional definition of an ambassador. You know it,
Yes.
and you agree with that.
Yes, I agree with that.
Ouais, bon, vous voulez me dire c'est mon nom, un ambassadeur, c'est un monde qui est tellement bon en parole. Il sait d'où haïtien, avec, il sait d'où ça tellement bien, ou qu'à garder pour trip là, pour aller un peu vite là. And ambassadorship requires the ability to communicate. And we are ambassadors for a cause as well. And it is that requires those of us, nous pas de go papier, university, qu'on n'a pas mettre soit dans les épaules nous pour ban nous golonner avec bagay, mais nous n'ayons conscience avec nous lever avec un bagay fait en la vie nous tout qui dit nous pour un petit step back avec calculer, réfléchir avec vie pour nous ça aller devant. C'est juste ça, c'est jeune monocado will and come again. Nous, ça c'est travail nous. And that is the reason why we have to always be prepared to share what we have in whatever ways we have, through whatever media we have. When I grew up, for us to sign a petition, you had to sign papers, petition for release of Nelson Mandela, or for the release of what was your prime minister in Dominica, Rosie Douglas, in Canada. In those days, when we signed petitions, you sign it on paper and you had to post it by registered mail in the post office for it to get to New York or to England or wherever it's going. Today, you could sign petitions online. Okay? When we grew up, sorry, we had to buy books. We had to buy books to read subjects. Today, you can read online. You could even purchase books online, and books read themselves to you. So, in that information age, what we have been able to do is to accelerate it. But at the same time, the IT advances and the progress can always also be stymied by bureaucracy. And I have something that I call revolutionary bureaucracy. When I worked in Grenada, I used to mention that to the comrades there and say that bureaucracy is bureaucracy, whether it's under capitalism, communism, socialism, or cooperativism. Bureaucracy is red tape. And therefore, one of my complaints about the workings of the CARICOM reparations movement is that at the national level, the governments appoint committees. You have one in Dominica, we have one in St. Lucia. There are 12, there are 13 in the 14 CARICOM member states. And they pay dues to CARICOM, annual dues, a certain amount of money calculated on the number of persons and the state of their economy. But the governments, apart from paying the dues to the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which is to run its business, they're also supposed to make contributions to the national committees. I mean, if you establish a national committee for reparations, the least you expect is that the government will give it funds. But more than half of the 12 member commissions, I don't know for Dominica, but more than 12 of the member commissions have never got a budget. In St. Lucia, we have passed 3 administrations. This is the fourth. And hopefully, we are told that we have a budgetary allocation, although we didn't have it in the budget, but we are told there's something for us hidden somewhere. Now, take, for example, all that I've been talking about there, the Brattle Report, the 10-point plan, the origin of reparations, the history of reparations, how it differs in the Caribbean from Africa, from India, and why all of us are knocking on the same doors. These things require lectures in every country. To set up a lecture, traditionally, it takes money. Do it now with IT, it also takes money and organization. And therefore, we have to be able to strike the balance between committees like ours that have been existing for 10 years with no subsidy, no subvention for meetings, but purely by way of our commitment. The same 10 persons and entities that were appointed in 2013 are still here. None have left. And we include people of high standing, a former governor general, we include a former an archbishop. We include many persons of high standing. We have various committees, including the Ministry of Education represented. But there's a saying, they dress the monkey. The white people used to say they dress the monkey, but the monkey not dancing. Well, in our case, we cannot dance because we're not even dressed. And therefore, the governments that do not make contributions to the national committees will be called upon to do so. There is an upcoming meeting next week of the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations for CARICOM leaders under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister of Barbados, who is responsible for reparations at CARICOM. They will be meeting, and that issue will come up again. Another one that will come up is the one I mentioned last time, the need for us to revive, as of this year, September this year, the opening of the new school year, the resumption of the lectures, the national lectures. And that is where we can answer your question. Imagine QFM GIS, Dominica, the other station, DBS, and all of the platforms in Dominica, because reparations is for everybody. It's not a party thing, and it's not an individual thing, and it's not a commercial something. Um, what we would do, the way we did that in 1919 and 1920, is that you have two sets of lectures. One set is your national reparations lectures, which Dominica and St. Lucia and Guadeloupe and Martinique can share next time, because that is in English and Creole, simultaneous, through UETV and UE Global Campus Educational thing. They do the regional aspect, and all the GISs and all the stations plug in. So simultaneously, the entire region and the people in the diaspora would be participating. But these are your national lectures. So Dominica will have it on its own day. Each one will have. That's your national lectures. Now the regional lectures, which would require everybody, are regional education lectures, and they are regional history, where you combine history with reparations. We teach our history so that we could understand why we want reparations. For example, we want reparations for slavery and native genocide. That's what we asked for 12 years ago. I want to propose that we have to take it in sequence, that the reparations have to be first for native genocide, because when Columbus came in 1492, he opened the way for the native genocide to slaughter the original Caribbean people, who they ended up calling Caribs and Arawaks, and give us all kind of Indian and rough names, right? Those were the first people. Their civilizations were destroyed to introduce European civilization and Christianity, and to open the way for slavery. And then came the slavery. So native genocide preceded slavery in the order of happening. So I would say let us look for reparations for native genocide, slavery, but it didn't end there, because after slavery, there was indentureship, where African enslaved people were replaced by Indians who signed contracts in languages they didn't understand, and who didn't have chains around their feet, but their responsibility was to keep the wheel of fortune turning, just like the slaves used to. And they were exploited by the imperial empires, hence why you have Indian communities in every single Caribbean island and all over Latin America and the Caribbean and in North America. And after the after the what I just mentioned in terms of the Indians is seeking
We have to
reparations.
wind down early because just 2 more minutes before the news. So let's
Oh,
wind
okay.
down because
So
I know
bagayla
you
bagayla
ready, ready to go.
oui, nous nous
We
pouvons
must
faire
get ready.
éducation, nous nous pouvons
Ouais,
faire
ouais, ouais.
éducation avec moi qu'a regardé pour nous ça fait plus programme qu'on nous a commencé éducation ça là vendredi passé et nous va continuer aujourd'hui. Yo selti ba moi vle demander encore from dernière fois. How do
Ouais.
you call the influence of language in preserving tradition and history? How do you call green tea in Creole, in Dominica?
Thé vert,
Huh?
thé
No,
vert.
green tea. That's French you're telling me there. In Creole,
Euh,
Diteshin. You don't
Ditéchine.
say that in Diteshin.
Pourquoi pas dité vert?
Well, green tea, no. Well, in St. Lucia, green tea. Remember I told you about Pangol
Yes, yes,
being
yes.
called pigeon peas? St.
Yes.
Lucia, we grow up knowing green tea, the thing we call green tea. In Creole, it is called Diteshin,
Ditéchine.
because tea came from China. And the Creole people name it China tea.
China
But the
tea.
English call it green tea.
I really want to thank you, Earl, and let's continue to link. Let's continue to connect. I mean, you are an encyclopedia of so much information, so much wisdom that we need to continue to teach our people. I really want to thank you, my brother, and let's continue the connection. I will praise you as to when next and on what medium we will continue our information. But that reparation thing is very important for us. Also, the Creole language and culture is so much more than just the language and put on the madras. We need to understand what it means to us as a people. Trinidad now are going fully ahead to try to recapture their Creole identity. Oh, merci appeal from nous que nous encore chebe for balaje.
Là, quoi, nous allons parler about Wassin Creole Pap Nefla.
Ouais, pas de problème. Et puis,
Nous allons parler about Benin. La
Benin.
Nous nous pour apprendre du Benin. C'est Creole qui a parlé là, hein?
Il y a parlé Creole à Benin, mais nous savons ça. Et puis,
Benin, c'est headquarters voodoo à Soulate.
Nous allons parler plus que ça. Bon, monsieur, okay, that was Earl Bousquet from St. Lucia. I mean, this brother is phenomenal. Like I said a while ago, he's the chair of the St. Lucia National Reparations Committee and a member of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Also a senior political correspondent, talk show host, and voice columnist. His journey expanding and 49 years as a chronic Caribbean chronicler, exploring the intersection of St. Lucia. This was another Creole Heartbeat program. Prince Wadix, happy Mother's Day weekend to every single mother, grandmother, godmother, mothers to be. And that's coming from Creole Heartbeat and the big station. Until next week, I'm Prince Wadix. May God bless you and may God bless Dominica.
La Dominique Esquisse en power. This May history with Hoops International Basketball comes to Dominica. The Creole Memorial Cup 2025. 4 nations, 3 destinations, 1 unforgettable experience. From Benin, the African continent, to La Martinique, Dominica to La Guadeloupe. Exciting basketball, youth clinics, culture, and commemoration collide in the nature ride. May 22nd, 24th, and 27th, 2025. On Saturday, May 24th, West Africa comes to Dominica. The Dominica All-Star basketball team versus the national team from Benin. And Guada versus La Martinique at the Massac Indoor Complex in Dominica. Mamma mia, for basket joué. Join us for a celebration of unity, heritage, and sports. Brought to you by Caribbean Sports and Sustainable Development and Creole Sports International in partnership with the #1 cultural organization in the Western Hemisphere, Creole Heartbeat. Let the games begin. Let culture ignite. Supported by Q95 FM, the big station. This is a message from the Creole ambassador of language and culture in Dominica, Prince Wadix. Our ancestors endured the unimaginable. They withstood the brutality of the whip,